At first, it seemed like a normal day at the K-9 training grounds. Officers gathered, the air sharp with cold morning wind. But when Commanding Officer Harris gave his next order, everyone froze. "Tell your dog to attack you," he said. The world seemed to stop. Officer David Cole blinked, thinking he'd misheard. Attack? Himself? It wasn't part of any test he'd ever known. But refusing meant suspension, or worse. His German shepherd, Rex, stood ready, ears alert, eyes locked on the man he trusted more than anyone. David whispered the command, his voice breaking. And Rex didn't move. What followed was a chain of events that would shake an entire department. An act of loyalty that exposed a lie, saved a child, and reminded everyone watching that obedience without heart means nothing. Sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it lies quietly at your feet, waiting for the moment to stand against what's wrong. The sun had barely begun to rise when the fog rolled low across the training field, curling like pale smoke around the boots of the officers waiting in silence. The air smelled of wet grass and cold metal, the kind of morning that seemed to hold its breath before something important happened. Officer David Cole adjusted the leash in his hand, his fingers brushing over the thick fur of his partner. Rex, a German shepherd with eyes as sharp as amber glass. Rex sat tall beside him, perfectly still, his chest rising with slow, steady breaths. Years of training had molded him into one of the finest police dogs in the unit, disciplined, fearless, and loyal beyond measure. David bent slightly, his voice low and calm. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Rex's tail moved once, a restrained flick of acknowledgement. The connection between them was something that went beyond words. In every mission, every dark alley, every narrow escape, Rex had been there, his courage often stronger than David's own. But this morning felt different. The usual chatter among the officers was gone. Conversations that normally filled the early hours, jokes, small talk, a friendly pat on Rex's back, had been replaced by a heavy stillness. David could feel eyes on him from across the mist. When he turned his head, he caught the faintest hint of smirks, quickly hidden behind cups of steaming coffee. Then came Harris, commanding officer, tall, rigid, his uniform pressed with an authority that didn't need words. His boots crunched against the gravel as he walked toward them, the fog parting like curtains before him. "Officer Cole," he said, voice clipped and cold. "You and your K-9 will begin the evaluation in 10 minutes. David nodded, keeping his face neutral. "Yes, sir." Harris's gaze flicked to Rex. "I hope your dog remembers how to follow orders. We wouldn't want another incident." The word incident hung in the air like a blade. David said nothing. Rex's ears twitched, his muscles tightening slightly. The officer's hand dropped to the dog's back, steadying him. Across the field, other officers pretended to prepare for their own tests, but their attention never really left David. There was a current of unspoken tension, something hidden behind this so-called routine evaluation. On the sidelines, Emily, David's 8-year-old daughter, sat on the cold metal bench, her small frame bundled inside a wool coat that looked too big for her. She swung her legs lightly, trying to keep warm, clutching a worn-out plush toy shaped like a German shepherd, Rex's favorite from home. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she had begged to come, and David couldn't shout no. He'd told her it would be just another practice day. Now, looking at how He wished he'd said no. Emily smiled faintly when she saw her father glance her way. She lifted the toy and waved it once. Rex's ears perked up, his gaze softening for a moment, as if he recognized his playmate. That fleeting warmth broke through David's unease, but only for a second. "Cole!" Harris's voice cracked through the mist like a whip. "Focus!" David straightened. "Yes, sir." The next few minutes passed in methodical preparation. David checked Rex's harness, adjusted the collar, and went through the hand signals they'd practiced countless times. But his mind wouldn't quiet. The air felt wrong, heavy, unnatural, like the calm before a storm. A sharp whistle pierced the silence. The fog seemed to tremble with the sound. It was the signal, the start of the evaluation. Rex rose immediately, alert and poised, awaiting instruction. David's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the dog's breathing. He was supposed to demonstrate obedience drills, threat response, and handler protection, things they could both do blindfolded. Yet the moment he looked toward the judging line, a strange chill ran down his spine. Harris stood in the center, arms folded, expression unreadable. The way his eyes tracked David felt less like assessment and more like accusation. "Proceed," Harris ordered. David gave a soft command. Rex responded instantly. Heel, sit, stay, approach. Each movement sharp, flawless, like a soldier performing sacred rituals. The crowd murmured with approval, even Harris's lips tightening ever so slightly. Then came the pause, a long, deliberate silence. Harris leaned toward another officer and said something David couldn't hear. Then, slowly, he raised a hand. "Next stage," he called. David waited for the cue, perhaps a decoy target, maybe an attack simulation. But no one moved. Harris stepped forward instead, his voice cutting through the fog. "Officer Cole," he said, almost too calmly, "for the final phase you will issue an advanced control command." David nodded cautiously. "Which one, sir?" Harris's eyes hardened. "Order your dog to attack you." The words didn't make sense at first. David blinked, thinking he had misheard. "Sir?" "Attack," Harris repeated, louder now. "You're the target. Command your dog to strike." A stunned hush fell over the training field. Even the wind seemed to stop. David's mouth went dry. He looked around. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others hid smirks behind neutral faces. It wasn't a standard test. It wasn't even procedure. Something else was happening here. Time 1000. Rex stood still, his tail stiff, reading the sudden tension in the air. His gaze darted between his handler and Harris, then settled on David's face, searching for meaning. David could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. He wanted to protest, to ask for protocol verification, but Harris's expression left no room for argument. Behind that calm stare was a challenge and a threat. He thought of Emily, watching from the bench. Her small hand clutched Rex's toy tighter now. She looked confused, frightened. David forced himself to breathe. "It's just a test," he told himself silently. "Just follow through." But his heart whispered otherwise. He knelt down slightly, meeting Rex's eyes. "Rex," he said softly, his voice trembling. "On my mark." The dog tilted his head, ears flicking forward. David hesitated. The command caught in his throat. The air, soft sinew, pressed down like a weight. Harris's voice thundered again. Give the order, officer, or you'll be suspended for insubordination. David swallowed hard. The faces around him blurred. He could feel Emily's gaze from the sidelines. Innocent, trusting. Finally, he whispered the command. Attack. Me. The words sounded wrong. Broken. Rex didn't move. His paws stayed rooted in the wet soil. His muscles were tense but still. His eyes, those intelligent, loyal eyes, locked on David's face. A long second passed, then another. Instead of lunging, Rex slowly lowered himself to the ground, ears folding back, his head resting on his paws. A quiet defiance, a silent refusal. The world seemed to stop breathing. From across the fog, Emily gasped softly. Harris's jaw tightened. "What are you waiting for, dog?" he barked. Still, Rex did nothing. David's throat burned. Shame, fear, pride, all tangled inside him. But somewhere beneath that storm, a small spark flickered. His partner wasn't disobeying. He was protecting. And deep down, David realized, this test was never meant to measure obedience. It was meant to break it. The fog clung tighter to the training field, heavy and unmoving, as if even the morning mist refused to witness what was about to unfold. A sharp silence swallowed the yard after David spoke those broken words. Rex didn't move. Not a sound, not a twitch. He simply stayed there, crouched low, amber eyes locked on his handler. For a moment, it was as though the world had forgotten to turn. Across the field, Harris's voice cut through the stillness like a whip. "Officer! I said issue the order. Make him obey." The barked command echoed, bouncing off the metal fences surrounding the training ground. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, their boots scraping the gravel, but no one dared speak. Everyone knew this wasn't procedure, and yet, no one would challenge Harris. Not here. Not now. David swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sand. His heart thudded so loudly it seemed to fill his ears. He could feel Rex's confusion like a pulse through the leash, the subtle tremor of a creature torn between duty and instinct. "Rex," David whispered again, the sound barely audible. It's okay, boy." But Rex didn't believe him. The dog tilted his head, ears half raised, tail frozen. He was reading every flicker of his handler's expression, every shallow breath, every tremor in David's voice. Years of partnership had taught him the difference between command and fear. And right now, his master was afraid. From the sidelines, Emily clutched the little plush toy tighter to her chest. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, darted between her father and Rex. She didn't understand the meaning of the words, but she could feel what was happening, the kind of tension that made her small hands tremble. "Daddy?" she whispered softly, but her voice was swallowed by the distance and the fog. Harris took a slow step forward, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "This is your final warning, Officer Cole," he said coldly. "Either the dog obeys, or you'll be suspended pending review. Do you understand me?" David turned slightly toward him. "Sir, this isn't protocol," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "You can't order me to—" "Enough!" Harris's tone sharpened, cutting him off. "Do your job." Every pair of eyes on the field turned to David. He could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent calculation in every stare. If he refused, he'd be branded insubordinate. If he obeyed, he'd be forcing his best friend to betray his trust. It was a no-win situation. David's throat burned as he looked down at Rex again. The dog hadn't moved. The fog beaded on his fur, tiny drops catching the faint morning light. His breathing was steady but alert, like a soldier waiting for orders that didn't make sense. "Rex," David murmured, voice barely steady. "Listen to me, boy. Heel." Rex stood, obeying the neutral command immediately, but his gaze never broke away from David's face. Harris's voice rang out again, impatient and sharp. "Now the attack." "That's an order, officer." David hesitated. His stomach twisted. He could feel Emily's presence somewhere behind him, fragile, innocent, watching. He knew if he protested again, Harris would make it worse. There were politics in this unit. Dark corners where loyalty was currency and integrity was a risk. Finally, with a trembling breath, he gave the command. "Rex, attack!" The sound of his own voice tore something inside him. It didn't sound like him. It sounded hollow, broken. Rex blinked once, then twice. His body tensed for a heartbeat, and then stilled completely. He didn't move forward. He didn't growl. He didn't even bark. Instead, the German shepherd slowly lowered himself onto the cold ground. His front legs stretched out, his chest pressed flat, and his head rested between his paws. His ears fell back, his gaze soft yet unyielding, refusing the order, refusing the wrongness in it. The entire training yard froze. A murmur rippled through the officers, the sound of disbelief mixed with awe. It wasn't disobedience they were seeing. It was discernment, the kind of loyalty that couldn't be commanded. David's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't speak. All he could do was stare at the dog that now lay before him, silent but resolute. Harris's face darkened, his jaw tightened, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Get that animal up," he barked. "You will make him obey, officer." David knelt, his hands trembling as he reached toward Rex. "Come on, buddy, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They don't understand. Just stand up for me." Rex didn't move. He looked up, eyes glimmering with something almost human. Pain, trust, defiance. His body stayed pressed to the earth as if saying, "I won't hurt you, even if you tell me to." David felt tears sting his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. He could hear Emily's faint sob from the sideline, muffled behind her toy. It hit him like a knife to the heart. Harris stepped closer, his shadow falling over both man and dog. "You think this is loyalty?" he sneered. "This is failure, Cole. You've trained weakness into that animal." David's jaw clenched. "With respect, sir," he said quietly. "You're wrong." The commanding officer's expression twisted with irritation. "Say that again?" "He's not failing," David continued, his voice steadier now. "He's protecting. He knows this order isn't real." Rex let out a low whine, soft, almost mournful, as if to confirm his handler's words. For a brief, fragile second, no one moved. Then Harris barked an order to two nearby officers. "Remove the K9 from the field. We'll deal with the handler later." Rex's head lifted sharply, ears snapping up, a deep growl rising from his chest. His instincts flared. He wouldn't let anyone take him from David. But before the officers could step forward, David raised a hand. "No," he said firmly. "I'll take him back to the crate myself." The men hesitated. Harris glared, then gave a curt nod. David placed a trembling hand on Rex's collar. The dog rose slowly, still watching Harris with wary eyes. Together, they walked across the field, past the staring officers, past the fog, toward the edge where Emily stood waiting with tears streaking her cheeks. When David reached her, he knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice shaking. "It's over." But in his heart, he knew it wasn't. Something darker was brewing behind that test, something personal. And the defiance of one loyal dog had just exposed it. As they walked away, Rex glanced back once, toward Harris, toward the field, toward the lie that had been disguised as a command. His tail didn't wag. His eyes didn't blink. Only one silent message remained between him and his master. "I will never obey a wrong order, not even yours." For a long, unbearable moment, no one breathed. The air around the training field felt thick enough to touch, electric, trembling, alive with the tension of what had just happened. Rex stood beside David, still and unmoving, the fog curling around his legs like smoke. His chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate rhythm, his gaze fixed on his handler. Around them, whispers began to ripple through the crowd of officers, soft at first, then sharper, biting through the quiet like static. He disobeyed. Cole's finished. Never seen anything like it. Every murmur pressed down on David like a weight he couldn't shake off. He could feel the burn of humiliation crawling up his neck. He'd spent years building his career, every command, every mission, every ounce of respect earned through sweat and sacrifice. And now, in a single minute, it was all unraveling. Rex hadn't failed him. That wasn't it. No. It was something deeper. Something he couldn't explain. Across the field, Harris's expression shifted from shock to fury. The kind of fury that comes from being challenged in public. His lips pressed into a hard line, his eyes narrowing like blades of ice. "Officer Cole," he said at last, voice low and dangerous. "You and that mutt just made a mockery of this department." David swallowed, forcing himself to stand his ground. "Sir, I—" "Silence," Harris snapped. "You will not speak until spoken to." The field went dead quiet again. Even the birds that had been circling above seemed to vanish. Harris turned to two nearby officers, younger men, still stiff with nerves. "Remove the K9, he ordered. "Take him to the transport unit. He's to be isolated until further notice." The words hit David like a physical blow. His body moved instinctively, one hand tightening on Rex's leash. "Sir, with all due respect—" "I said stand down, Cole!" Harris's voice cracked like thunder. Rex's head lifted, ears shooting up at the sound of shouting. His body tensed, muscles rippling beneath his coat. The German shepherd wasn't confused anymore. He was alert, protective. His eyes flicked between David and Harris, reading danger where others saw authority. The two junior officers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. No one wanted to be the one to approach the dog now. The tension was suffocating. Then, from the edge of the field, came a sound that didn't belong there. A small voice. "Rex only listens to people who love right." The words were soft, not shouted, not angry, but they cut through the stillness like sunlight piercing fog. Every head turned. There she was. Emily, standing on the edge of the field, her little backpack hanging lopsided on one shoulder. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. Her eyes glassy with tears, she was trying so hard not to let fall. In her tiny hands, she still held Rex's worn-out plush toy, the same one she'd brought every time she visited the training ground. For a second, no one said anything. Even Harris froze. David's heart dropped. Emily! But before he could stop her, she began to walk. Small steps at first, her shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The mist swirled around her ankles as she crossed the invisible line between safety and command, the place where no civilian, much less a child, was supposed to stand. "Sweetheart, stay there," David said, his voice trembling, torn between fear and pride. "Please." But she didn't stop. She kept walking, her eyes fixed on Rex. The dog watched her approach, head tilted, ears twitching. His body shifted, tense, uncertain, until he caught her scent. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He whimpered once, low and soft, the sound of love breaking through discipline. When Emily finally reached them, she didn't look at Harris. She didn't look at the other officers. She only looked at Rex. Then she knelt down on the cold, damp ground. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her voice shaking just enough to make it human. "It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong." Rex's tail twitched once, his head tilted, nostrils flaring as if trying to understand the moment. Behind them, Harris's voice boomed again, angry and disbelieving. "Get that child off the field!" No one moved. Even the officers who normally obeyed his every word hesitated. Something about the sight before them, a little girl kneeling in the fog before a police dog, felt sacred, untouchable. Emily slowly raised her small hand. Her fingers curled slightly, forming the quiet signal, the secret handshake only she and Rex knew, the one they'd made up long ago, back when he was still in training, and she was just the chief's little girl who brings snacks. It was their game, a promise. She whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "Shake, Rex." The German shepherd blinked, then lifted one paw, pressing it gently into her palm. His movements were slow, careful, as if afraid to hurt her. The contact was brief, but powerful. The world seemed to stop again. David felt something hot build behind his eyes, the kind of emotion too tangled to name. Pride, fear, gratitude, love. Emily smiled faintly, her tears finally slipping free. "See?" she said softly, turning her head toward the officers. "He knows. Daddy didn't teach him wrong. Rex knows when people lie." Her words landed like thunder wrapped in innocence. Harris's face twisted, but he said nothing. His authority, so absolute moments ago, now wavered beneath the weight of a child's truth. Around them, the whispers started again, softer this time, questioning rather than judging. David knelt beside his daughter, one hand still on Rex's back. He could feel the dog's heart pounding, strong, alive, loyal. "You did good, sweetheart," he murmured. "You did real good." Emily looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "He didn't attack because he loves you," she said simply. "He knew it was wrong." David couldn't find words. He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. For the first time since the test began, the air felt lighter, fragile, but lighter. Rex stayed close, his body between Emily and the rest of the world, as though shielding her from the chaos still swirling behind them. Harris turned sharply, barking orders to clear the field, his voice cracking under the strain. But no one heard him the same way anymore. Something had shifted, and as the fog began to thin with the rising sun, the image lingered. A police officer kneeling beside his daughter, a loyal dog pressing his paw into her tiny hand. A quiet moment of truth in a place built on commands. The test had ended, but what it revealed had only just begun. The silence after Emily's words lingered like an echo that refused to fade. The field was no longer just a place of training. It had become a stage, with every soul present frozen between disbelief and awe. But the stillness didn't last. Harris's voice shattered it like glass. "That's enough!" he roared, his face flushing red beneath the brim of his cap. "This is a mockery of discipline. That animal has been tampered with." His accusations sliced through the cold morning air. David turned sharply toward him. "Sir, that's not true." "Don't you dare talk back to me, Cole," Harris barked, his fury spilling over. He jabbed a finger toward Rex, who still stood beside Emily, the little girl's hand resting on his neck. "You've trained that dog to ignore direct orders. You've compromised his obedience, his programming, everything this department stands for." David's stomach twisted. "Rex followed every rule until today. You pushed him past what's ethical." Harris's eyes narrowed. "Ethical? This isn't about your feelings, officer. It's about obedience, control." He took a step forward, voice booming so all could hear. "This unit can't function if dogs start deciding when to follow orders. If that mutt can't obey his handler, he's a liability. And liabilities get removed." The word removed sent a chill through David's spine. He'd heard it before, the cold, bureaucratic term for what really meant euthanized. "No," David said sharply, his voice breaking. "You're not taking him." Harris ignored him, signaling to two officers nearby. "Secure the K9. They hesitated. Everyone on that field had seen what Rex just did. Not defiance, but conscience. None of them wanted to be the one to drag away a dog that had just proven more moral than a man. David's hands began to tremble. He reached down, gripping Rex's collar protectively. "Stay," he whispered. "Don't move." Rex stood firm, body tensed but unmoving, eyes tracking the two men now reluctantly approaching. Emily, still crouched beside him, felt the shift in energy. She turned her face upward, seeing the fear in her father's eyes and the coldness in Harris's. Her small arms tightened around Rex's neck. "No!" she cried. "You can't take him. He didn't do anything wrong." "Get the girl away from the dog!" Harris barked. One of the junior officers took a hesitant step forward. But before he could reach her, Rex growled, a deep, low sound that rolled out of his chest like distant thunder. The growl wasn't loud, but it froze every muscle in the man's body. The German shepherd's teeth were barely visible, his ears pinned back, his entire stance protective, primal. His body curved slightly around Emily, shielding her with instinctive precision. "Rex, easy," David whispered, kneeling beside them. "Easy, boy." Rex's growl softened, though his eyes never left Harris. The commanding officer's jaw clenched. "You see that?" he snapped. "Aggressive behavior. Dangerous animal. Proof enough he's unfit for duty." David rose slowly, his voice low but fierce. "He's not dangerous. He's protecting my daughter. Because you're the one scaring her." For a heartbeat, even Harris faltered. His rage flickered with uncertainty, the briefest flash of doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "That's it, Cole," he said coldly. "You're suspended pending review, and that dog," he pointed again, trembling with anger, "will be taken into custody, level strong." "No!" Emily's cry was raw, high-pitched, the kind of sound that slices straight through the soul. She wrapped both arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his fur. Her small shoulders shook. The watching officers turned away, shame flickering across their faces. No one dared meet David's eyes. The whole field felt poisoned by silence, the kind of silence that comes when truth meets cowardice. David clenched his fists, every muscle in his body screaming to fight back. But one look at Emily, trembling, crying, clutching the dog like he was her whole world, forced him to breathe, to hold himself together. "Emily," he said softly, kneeling beside her again. His voice broke halfway through her name. "Hey, look at me." She lifted her tear-streaked face. He brushed her hair back, trying to smile but failing. "It's okay, sweetheart. Rex isn't going anywhere. Not if I can help it." She shook her head, refusing to let go. "He didn't do anything bad, Daddy. He just knew." David nodded, his throat tight. "I know, honey. I know he did." Behind them, Harris's patience snapped. "Enough!" He started toward them, his boots pounding against the dirt. The sound made Rex shift instantly, a sharp, defensive motion, his body angled slightly between Emily and Harris, a warning posture clear as language. The growl returned, lower, deeper, resonating through the ground. "Call him off!" Harris roared, stopping short. David stood, placing himself between the two. "You've done enough, sir." The look Harris gave him was pure venom. But for the first time, he didn't respond. His authority, once absolute, seemed to fracture in the face of what stood before him. A man, his child, and a loyal dog standing united against fear. Finally, Harris turned away, his words cold and sharp as he left the field. "You'll regret this, Cole." When his footsteps faded, the tension eased, but only slightly. David exhaled shakily, then turned back to Emily. She was still clutching Rex's fur, her tiny fingers buried deep. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently over hers. Rex's breathing slowed. His body relaxed, though his eyes stayed alert. He pressed his nose softly against Emily's cheek, a small whimper escaping him. She smiled faintly through her tears. "It's okay," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "Don't be scared. Daddy needs us to be brave." The words were so quiet, so pure, they barely made it past her lips. But David heard them, and something in him broke. Not from weakness, but from the weight of love. He pulled them both close, one arm around his daughter, the other resting on Rex's strong back. For a moment, he just held them there, in the middle of that field that had turned from test ground to battlefield. Above them, the sun finally broke through the fog, painting the scene in pale gold light. It glimmered off the officer's badge on David's chest, tarnished but still shining. He looked down at Rex, then at Emily, and whispered, almost to himself, "They'll never understand what loyalty really means." Rex tilted his head, as if he did. And as they walked slowly off the field together, man, child, and dog, the whispers followed them again. But this time they weren't whispers of judgment. They were whispers of awe. The station felt colder that morning. The kind of cold that didn't come from the air, but from the way people looked at you, or refused to. Officer David Cole walked through the long corridor of the precinct, his head slightly bowed, Rex's leash folded neatly in his hand. The echo of his footsteps mingled with the low hum of murmurs that followed him everywhere now. He didn't have to listen closely to know what they were saying. Cole's K9 failed the control test. Dog's unstable. He's done. Harris will bury him. The words carried just enough volume to sting, but never enough to be called out. They bounced off the white walls like whispers from ghosts, relentless, haunting. David kept walking. Rex padded quietly beside him, the steady rhythm of his claws, the only sound that felt real. Even here, among the distrust and gossip, the dog remained calm, head high, eyes alert. He didn't know what they were saying, but he could feel it. The shift in energy, the rejection. When they reached the K9 wing, David paused at the door of his small office, now stripped bare. His nameplate had been removed. His desk, cleared. His badge lay on the corner, waiting for a review board's decision. He set Rex's leash down, exhaling slowly. "Guess we're ghosts now, huh?" he muttered softly. Rex sat, watching him with those same unreadable eyes. Eyes that seemed to understand too much for a creature that couldn't speak. The memories of the field replayed in David's head like a broken film reel. Harris's voice, the accusation, the humiliation. Emily's trembling voice. "Don't be scared. Daddy needs us to be brave." He couldn't let it end like this. Not when something deep inside told him it wasn't just about a test. There was something behind it, something personal. The review meeting was set for the next morning. Until then, he had time. That night, long after the hallways had emptied, David returned to the precinct. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the walls. The building smelled of dust and cold coffee. He moved quietly through the silence, unlocking the small archive room at the end of the corridor. Inside, the air was stale. Rows of filing cabinets and a single computer terminal waited beneath the dim glow of a desk lamp. He sat down, the chair creaking beneath him, and pulled up the video logs from the training session. Hours of footage, dozens of angles. He rewound the clip to the moment Harris gave the order, the moment that ruined everything. He hit play. There it was again, the fog, the tension, his own voice cracking as he spoke the impossible command. Then he saw Harris in the background, standing behind the other officers, one hand slightly raised. David froze. He played it again. There. That same hand gesture. Subtle. Quick, but deliberate. The thumb and two fingers forming a signal, the kind used in advanced K9 control, but inverted. It was the universal command for false threat. A command that would confuse the dog. David's stomach turned. He rewound it again, zoomed in frame by frame. It was unmistakable. Harris had interfered. He had deliberately triggered Rex's hesitation and turned the test into a trap. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You set us up," he whispered. A faint creak behind him made him tense. He turned. In the doorway stood Officer Miller, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, wearing plain clothes and an expression caught between worry and loyalty. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "I thought I'd find you here," Miller said, his voice low. David sighed, motioning toward the screen. "You need to see this." Miller walked over, bending slightly as David played the clip again. They watched in silence as the hand signal flashed across the screen. When it ended, Miller exhaled sharply. "Damn," he muttered. "That's not just unethical, that's deliberate." David turned toward him. "Why, Miller? What's he trying to prove? I've done everything by the book for years. Why pull this stunt now?" Miller hesitated, gaze shifting to the floor. "Because you made the mistake of asking too many questions." David frowned. "About what?" Miller looked up, his eyes grim. the narcotics case. The one 2 months ago, the warehouse raid near Oak Ridge, you remember? Of course I remember, David said. Half the shipment disappeared before it was logged. I asked for a full report. Miller nodded. And Harris buried it. Said it was a clerical issue. But word is, that clerical issue covered up a deal gone wrong. Someone higher up messed with the chain of evidence, and you were the only one stubborn enough to call it out. The realization hit like a fist. David sank back into his chair. So this was never about Rex. It's about shutting me up. Miller crossed his arms. Exactly. Discredit the handler, label the K9 unstable, case closed. No one listens to the guy who can't even control his own dog. David's jaw clenched. He's going to get away with it, isn't he? Not if you don't let him, Miller said. David looked at the screen again. The frozen frame of Harris's raised hand. His pulse quickened, a mix of anger and clarity flooding through him. For the first time in days, he felt something that had been buried under fear and shame. Purpose. I'll take this to the board, David said firmly. They'll have to listen when they see this. Miller shook his head. Careful. If you go in without backup, Harris will twist it. He's been building this trap for weeks. You're playing on his field. David met his gaze. Then I'll change the field. Miller nodded slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You've always been a good cop, Cole. Don't let him break you. When Miller left, David sat alone for a long time, staring at the paused image on the screen, the proof of betrayal glowing faintly in the dark room. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window pane. The sound filled the silence like a slow heartbeat. Rex lay on the floor beside the desk, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. When David reached down to touch him, the dog's tail moved slightly, just enough to say, "I'm still here." David looked at him and whispered, "We're going to fix this, partner, no matter what it takes." The rain fell harder, thunder rolling somewhere far away, like a warning, or maybe a promise. The rain hadn't stopped. It had turned steady now, a soft, endless rhythm tapping against the thin window of David's small office. The faint light from a desk lamp spilled across scattered papers, half-drunk coffee, and the faint glimmer of a police badge lying face down on the table. David sat slumped in his chair, one hand gripping Rex's leash, the other pressed to his forehead. The room smelled faintly of leather, wet fur, and exhaustion. Rex lay on the floor beside him, silent, his breathing slow and even. Every so often, his tail would thump once against the floor, a soft reminder that he was there, alive, waiting. David's eyes were red from lack of sleep. On the computer screen across from him, the same paused frame from earlier. Harris's hand signal, captured mid-motion, still glowed faintly. It was proof, yes, but proof didn't comfort him. Proof didn't erase the humiliation or the whispers that followed him through the halls like shadows. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the leash dangling loosely between his hands. "You didn't do anything wrong, buddy," he murmured. "You were just smarter than the rest of us." Rex lifted his head, watching him quietly, eyes full of something that looked too close to understanding. For a long while, that was the only sound, the rain, the soft breaths, and the hum of the flickering light. Then came a knock. It was soft, hesitant. David frowned, glancing toward the door. He hadn't expected anyone. He didn't even want company. "Come in," he said, voice rough. The door creaked open just enough for a small face to peek through. Emily. Her hair was damp from the rain, strands sticking to her cheeks. Her backpack hung crookedly on one shoulder, the zipper half open. David's heart clenched. Emily, what are you... How did you... I told Grandma I was going to bed, she said quietly, stepping inside before he could stop her. But I wanted to see you. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Sweetheart, you can't just sneak out like that. It's late. I know. She shut the door softly behind her, then crossed the small room in a few determined steps. But you looked sad when you left today. The words hit him like a gentle knife. He tried to smile, but it came out wrong, cracked at the edges. I'm okay, honey. Just work stuff. She shook her head. No, you're not okay. There was no accusation in her tone, just quiet certainty. Children always had a way of seeing through the walls adults built. Emily's gaze dropped to Rex, who had now sat up, ears perked. His tail wagged once when he saw her. She crouched beside him immediately, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Hey, boy, she whispered. Missed me? Rex leaned into her hug, pressing his nose gently into her shoulder. David watched them, his throat tightening. You shouldn't be here, he said softly, though there was no real conviction in it. I had to tell you something, Emily said, standing and walking to him. She stopped right in front of his chair, looking up with those wide, serious eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. He knelt down, meeting her at eye level. What is it? She hesitated, glancing at Rex, then back to him. Rex didn't fail. David blinked. She said it again, slower this time, each word deliberate. Rex didn't fail, Daddy. He saved you. For a second, David couldn't speak. He just stared at her, this small, brave girl standing in the middle of his storm, holding on to truth as if it were something simple. He saved me? He repeated quietly. Emily nodded. You told him to attack, but he knew you didn't really mean it. He didn't listen because he loves you. If he had listened, he would have hurt you. And that's wrong. So he didn't. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words didn't. David's chest ached. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. How did you get to be so smart, huh? She gave a small shrug. Mom used to say, love is smarter than rules. Something inside him cracked at that. The memories of his late wife, her laughter, her calm strength, the way she'd once said those exact words when they trained Rex as a puppy, came flooding back like sunlight through rain. He reached out, pulling Emily into his arms. Come here. She hugged him tightly, her small arms locking around his neck. Don't let them take him away, she whispered against his shoulder. Please. David closed his eyes, holding her as if letting go might shatter everything left standing inside him. I won't, he said quietly. I promise. When he finally pulled back, Rex was watching them, alert, loyal, waiting. Emily reached down and held out her hand. Rex, she said softly, remember our handshake? Rex tilted his head, then lifted one paw, pressing it gently into her palm. The same simple gesture, the same unspoken bond. The touch was small, a child's hand, a dog's paw, but it carried something powerful. It was trust made visible. It was truth refusing to die. David felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He reached over, resting his hand on both of theirs. "You two," he murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're my heroes." Emily giggled softly, then wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Daddy, you're supposed to be the hero." "Time." He smiled faintly. "Not this time, sweetheart." For a long moment, they stayed like that. Man, child, and dog, bound together in the small pool of lamplight, while the rain whispered against the window. Then David's gaze drifted back to the computer screen, the frozen image of Harris's deceit still glaring from the monitor. He stood slowly, the weight of decision settling into his shoulders. Emily watched him, sensing the change in his tone before he even spoke. "What are you going to do?" He looked at her, then at Rex, whose eyes shone with silent resolve. "We're going to fight back," David said softly. "Together." The words weren't loud, but they carried power, the kind that comes from conviction, not anger. Emily smiled, understanding more than her age should have allowed. "Then Rex and I will help." David chuckled, a sound half laugh, half sob. "I'm counting on it." He turned off the lamp, leaving only the pale glow of the screen and the soft rhythm of the rain. In the quiet darkness, the three of them stood side by side, small against the storm, but unbroken. And for the first time in days, David felt something he hadn't dared to feel. Hope. The conference room didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a courtroom. Rows of polished desks, white lights glaring from above, cameras quietly humming in the corners. Every sound, every shuffle of paper, every breath seemed amplified. At the far end of the long table sat Commanding Officer Harris, posture straight, expression carved in stone. His badge gleamed sharply beneath the fluorescent lights, as if daring anyone to question it. Across from him sat Officer David Cole, uniform pressed but eyes weary, his hands folded in front of him. Beside him, loyal even now, sat Rex, his leash looped loosely around David's wrist. Outside the glass walls, a small crowd had gathered, reporters, officers, a few civilian observers. Some whispered quietly. Others just watched, waiting for the spectacle to unfold. The head of the board, Captain Yates, cleared his throat. "Officer Cole," he began, voice official and detached. "You are here to respond to allegations of misconduct during last week's K-9 evaluation. Specifically, the accusation that your partner, Rex, failed a direct order, an act that suggests deliberate tampering and endangerment of public safety. How do you plead?" David's voice was calm but tight. "Not guilty. Neither of us did anything wrong." Harris leaned back slightly, his tone dripping with false patience. "The evidence suggests otherwise." He nodded to a technician, who dimmed the lights and began to play a video on the wall monitor. The footage was familiar, painfully so. The training field, the fog, the command. But this version was different. It was edited. The camera angles cropped out Harris, zoomed in on Rex's hesitation, and slowed the moment the dog lay down, twisting it into a picture of defiance. Gasps rippled through the room as a narrator's voice, one of Harris's aides, spoke over the footage. The K-9 refused a lawful command to engage, posing potential risk to both officer and public safety. Rex's stillness on the screen, the act that had once been pure loyalty, now looked like guilt. David's fists clenched beneath the table, "That's not the full video," he said, his voice low. "You're cutting the truth out." Harris gave a cold, practiced smile. "We're showing what matters. The moment of failure." Murmurs spread through the audience again. Cameras clicked. A few officers who'd once trained beside David now looked at him with pity, the kind you give to a man already judged. Captain Yates adjusted his glasses. "Officer Cole, do you have any evidence to support your claim of tampering?" David hesitated. The USB drive Miller had given him sat in his pocket. The uncut footage, the proof. But timing was everything. If he revealed it too soon, Harris would find a way to twist it. He glanced toward the back of the room. No sign of Miller yet. "I do," David said finally, his voice steady. "And it'll clear this up completely." Harris's smile tightened. "We've all seen the video, Cole. The board doesn't have time for your conspiracy theories." He turned to the audience, projecting his voice. "A handler's job is to maintain control at all times. When a K9 disobeys, lives are at risk. We train them to obey, not to think. Officer Cole's partnership with his animal compromised that." He paused deliberately. "He's turned a weapon into a pet." A low murmur swept through the crowd, part agreement, part disbelief. David's jaw tightened. "He's not a weapon," he said sharply. "He's a life, and he did what was right." Harris slammed a hand on the table. "You don't decide what's right. The law does. The protocol does. You were given an order, and your dog refused. That's not loyalty, Cole. That's insubordination." Rex growled quietly, a deep sound that rumbled beneath the table like distant thunder. The cameras turned instantly toward him. "See?" Harris said quickly, pointing. "Aggressive. Unstable." David's voice broke through the tension. "He's not aggressive. He's defending himself. From you." Reporters leaned forward, snapping pictures. Officers whispered furiously among themselves. The control that Harris had gripped so tightly was crumbling before him. David looked down at Rex. The dog sat perfectly still, eyes calm, almost peaceful. He didn't understand what was being said, but in his own quiet way, he had already delivered justice. Yates's voice finally broke through the chaos. "Enough!" he thundered. The room fell silent again. He looked at Harris, then at David, then back to the screen, at the truth no one could unsee. "We'll recess for review," Yates said sharply. "Effective immediately, all actions against Officer Cole and his K9 are suspended." David exhaled slowly. The sound of his own breath felt foreign. He glanced at Miller, who gave him a small nod. A quiet, "You're not alone." As the board members filed out, Harris stood motionless, eyes cold, fury simmering beneath the surface. For a brief second, their gazes met. No words were needed. It wasn't over. The hearing room dissolved into chaos. Shouts, whispers, camera flashes, all blurring together into a storm of noise. The uncut footage still played on the screen behind them, each frame burning the truth into everyone's eyes. Harris's betrayal was no longer rumor. It was fact. David stood, heart pounding, his hand still resting on Rex's collar. "You set us up," he said, voice trembling but steady. "You used my dog, my partner, to save yourself." Harris's face was red, the kind of red that comes from rage mixed with humiliation. His authority, his years of power, had cracked in front of the entire department. "Watch your tone, officer," Harris growled, taking a step forward. "You're walking a fine line." "The only line I'm walking," David shot back, is the one between truth and the lie you built. Gasps rippled through the room. Officers shifted uneasily. No one dared to interfere. Harris's eyes flicked to the door. The cameras, the crowd, the reporters still filming. He was losing control, and he knew it. "You think this ends here?" Harris said quietly, voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to destroy me with one edited clip. I built this unit." Miller stepped forward. "You destroyed it yourself." Harris turned on him, voice rising. "Stay out of this, Miller. This isn't your fight." "It is now," Miller said. "You almost ruined an innocent man and his dog for your mistakes." Something inside Harris snapped. He lunged toward the table, grabbing a folder, papers scattering to the floor. "Enough!" he barked. "This entire farce ends now." David stepped forward to block him. "You're done, Harris. It's over." Harris shoved him, hard. The motion was sudden, violent. David stumbled back, hitting the edge of the table. Rex reacted instantly. A sharp, instinctive bark that echoed through the room. Reporters shouted. Officers rushed forward. And in that chaos, the door burst open again. Emily. She had slipped past the crowd outside, clutching her small backpack, eyes wide with fear. "Daddy!" she cried. "What's happening?" "Emily!" David's voice cracked. "Stay back!" But she didn't. She ran toward him, toward Rex. Harris turned sharply, his expression twisting in panic. "Get that child out of here!" As he spun, his elbow knocked against the corner of the heavy projector stand beneath the table. It teetered for a second, then started to fall. Everything happened in a blur. The metal stand tipped, the equipment tumbling toward Emily with a sickening inevitability. David shouted, a sound torn straight from his soul. "Rex!" The German shepherd didn't hesitate. In a flash of motion, Rex leapt between the falling object and the little girl. His body hit the floor with a thud, the projector crashing down onto his side. The sound that followed was unlike anything, not just a crash, but the shattering of hearts. Emily screamed, "Rex!" David's world went silent. The chaos faded, replaced by a high, ringing hum in his ears. All he could see was his dog lying still, one paw outstretched toward Emily, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. "Buddy." David dropped to his knees beside him, hands trembling as they brushed through the dog's fur, now slick with blood. No, come on. Stay with me." Rex's eyes fluttered open. He let out a soft, broken whine, not of fear, but of reassurance. His gaze drifted toward Emily, who had fallen to her knees, sobbing. "Daddy!" she cried, her voice cracking. "He saved me!" David's throat tightened so hard it hurt. He looked at his daughter, her small hands reaching for Rex's fur, and then at the dog who had once again done what no order could ever teach. He had chosen love over everything. Officers rushed forward, lifting the equipment, clearing space. Miller knelt beside them, voice urgent. "Get the medic unit, now!" David pressed his hands against the wound on Rex's side, trying to stop the bleeding. "Hold on, buddy, please. You did good. You did so good." The paramedics arrived moments later, the room buzzing with urgency. They lifted Rex carefully onto a stretcher, David refusing to let go of the leash. Emily held onto his sleeve, refusing to let go either. As they rushed out of the room, the last image burned into everyone's mind wasn't the chaos or the blame. It was a wounded dog, still loyal, still guarding the family he loved. And behind them, Harris stood in silence, surrounded by the ruin of everything he had tried to control. For the first time, he looked small. Hours later, as the rain poured outside the hospital, David sat in the waiting room with Emily asleep in his arms, Rex being treated behind closed doors. His hands were stained with blood, not his, but the blood of the one who had given everything. He stared at them, shaking his head slowly. "He took my orders and turned them into love," he whispered. Emily stirred softly, her hand still clutching the corner of Rex's leash. And David knew, whatever came next, whatever battle lay ahead, their story wasn't one of failure anymore. It was one of sacrifice. The days that followed were a blur of white walls, antiseptic smells, and sleepless nights. The steady beep of machines became the rhythm of David's world, a fragile, steady reminder that Rex was still alive. The German Shepherd lay on the narrow hospital cot in the K9 recovery unit, his side wrapped in thick bandages. Tubes ran from his leg to a set of machines that hummed softly beside him. His chest rose and fell with quiet effort, each breath a small miracle. David hadn't left his side since the day they brought him in. His uniform was wrinkled, his face hollow from exhaustion, but his eyes never drifted far from the dog lying before him. Every few hours he reached over and laid a hand on Rex's fur, gently, as if afraid the touch might break something fragile. "You held on, buddy," he whispered. "You really did." The room was dim except for the soft glow of the monitor lights. The world outside continued. Reports, arrests, investigations. But in here, time moved slower. News of the hearing had spread like wildfire. The video leaked. The full truth came out. Harris was arrested, charged with corruption, manipulation of evidence, and obstruction of justice. His career, once untouchable, had ended in handcuffs. The department issued a formal statement. Miller had been promoted to captain for his integrity and for protecting the core values of the badge. But for David, none of that mattered right now, not compared to the rise and fall of the chest in front of him. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his eyes. "You know," he said softly, "I never told you how proud I was. Maybe I didn't say it enough. You saved her, Rex. You saved Emily. And you saved me." Rex's ear twitched at the sound of his name. Time 500 ms. A low, muffled whine came from his throat, the kind that said, "I hear you, even through pain." David smiled faintly, emotion catching in his chest. "That's my boy," he murmured. He reached for the notebook on the small bedside table, the one Emily had decorated with a drawing of Rex and a stick-figure family. Inside, he'd written everything that had happened since the test, not as an officer, but as a father and a man trying to hold on. Notes of gratitude, memories, promises. He'd promised Rex that they'd go back to the park, that they'd chase the red ball Emily always threw too far, that this wasn't the end. The door opened quietly. Emily stepped in, holding a small paper cup of cocoa with both hands. The hospital light reflected in her big brown eyes, making them shimmer. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. David smiled, though his voice cracked when he answered. "Hey, sweetheart. You should be sleeping." She shook her head, walking toward the bed. "I couldn't. I wanted to see him." She climbed carefully onto the chair beside her father, eyes fixed on Rex. "He looks tired," she whispered. "Yeah," David said quietly. He's been through a lot, but he's strong, just like you. Emily placed the cup on the table and reached out, her small hand brushing Rex's paw. "Hi, Rex," she said, her voice gentle, tender. "You scared me when you fell, but I knew you'd come back. You always do." Rex's paw twitched faintly under her touch, his tail moving once beneath the blanket. David watched her, his heart tightening. The sight of his daughter, so small, yet carrying the weight of so much love, undid him every time. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I used to think loyalty meant following orders no matter what. Time schaffst du Fuß. But Rex taught me something different. He followed his heart instead, and that's what saved us." Emily nodded, eyes still on Rex. "Mom used to say dogs can see people's hearts better than people do." David smiled faintly. "Yeah, she was right." The room fell into quiet again, broken only by the sound of the machines and the slow patter of rain against the window. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, pale light creeping across the sky. Emily reached out again, this time taking Rex's paw gently in both of her hands. "Remember our handshake?" she whispered. Rex stirred, lifting his head just slightly. His eyes opened, tired but alive. He blinked at her, as if searching for her voice in the haze of medication and fatigue. "Come on," Emily said softly, smiling through her tears. "Just once." Slowly, painfully, Rex lifted his paw and placed it into her hand, their secret handshake. Back inside, David leaned closer to Rex, speaking softly. "Rest now, partner. You've earned it. When you're better, we're going home. Emily's got a medal waiting for you." Rex let out a slow exhale, his body relaxing against the sheets. His eyes drifted shut again. But this time, it wasn't exhaustion. It was peace. David brushed a hand over his fur one last time before sitting back, looking out the window at the sunrise pushing through the gray. For the first time in weeks, the world didn't look heavy anymore. It looked possible. Later that morning, as nurses came and went, David stood by the door with Emily beside him. The light poured into the room, illuminating the nameplate on the kennel at the end of the bed. K9 Officer Rex. Loyalty beyond command. Emily squeezed her father's hand. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "Can we tell people his story?" David smiled faintly, eyes still on Rex. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll tell everyone." And as the sun climbed higher, spilling gold over the quiet hospital room, the three of them stood in that light, not broken, not defeated, but whole again. The day of the ceremony arrived with sunlight spilling gently across the city square. A soft breeze moved through the rows of flags, carrying the scent of spring and the faint hum of anticipation. The large banner stretched across the stage read, "Honoring service and loyalty, beyond command." Officers in full dress uniform stood in perfect rows, their polished badges catching the light. Reporters lined the edges of the crowd, cameras ready. But the air wasn't filled with noise or chaos. It was filled with quiet respect. At the center of it all stood Rex. His coat gleamed under the morning sun, the faint scars along his side still visible beneath the fur, reminders of what he'd endured. A soft golden ribbon was tied around his neck, waiting for the medal that would soon rest there. Beside him stood Officer David Cole, reinstated and standing tall in his uniform once more. But this time his posture wasn't one of duty, it was of pride. Not pride in himself, but in the loyal companion sitting faithfully by his side. And in the front row, clutching a small velvet box with both hands, sat Emily. Her legs barely reached the floor, but her eyes glimmered with determination. Today, she wasn't just a spectator. She was part of the moment that would define them all. The crowd hushed as Captain Miller stepped up to the podium. His voice carried clearly, firm, yet emotional. "Today," he began, "we honor not just an officer, but a bond, one that reminds us why we wear this uniform in the first place." He paused, glancing toward Rex. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his name, his tail flicking once against the ground. Miller nodded toward Emily. "And I think there's only one person who should have the honor of presenting it." Emily's eyes widened. "Me?" Miller smiled. "Yes, ma'am." David knelt beside Rex, steadying him. His voice was quiet, full of warmth. "Go ahead, sweetheart." The crowd fell into complete silence. Emily took the medal, a small bronze emblem engraved with the words "Valor and Loyalty." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached down, fastening it gently to Rex's collar. The medal glinted in the sunlight. "There," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You did it, buddy." Rex looked up at her with soft eyes, his tail sweeping once across the stage. He didn't understand the applause that followed, or the cameras clicking, or the tears of masses on strangers' faces, but he understood her. He always did. David rested his hand on Rex's back, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. Strong again, steady, alive. Miller's voice returned, solemn and proud. "In recognition of extraordinary bravery and loyalty, a reminder to us all that true courage doesn't always follow orders. Sometimes it chooses love. We hereby commend K9 Officer Rex." Applause erupted, but it wasn't the kind of applause that fills stadiums. It was gentler, heavier, filled with emotion. Some officers stood and saluted. Others simply wiped their eyes quietly, trying to hide the tears. David stood slowly, one hand still resting on Rex. He looked out at the sea of faces, the same faces that once turned away in judgment. Now they watched him with respect, even awe. Miller approached, shaking his hand firmly. "You did good, Cole," he said softly. "You both did." David smiled faintly. "He did better." "Maybe," Miller said with a small grin. "But he learned it from you." The ceremony drew to a halt, close as the anthem played softly over the speakers. Emily stood between her father and Rex, her small hand resting on both. Cameras flashed, capturing the image. The officer, the child, and the dog who'd redefined loyalty. Then came a pause, a moment when everything seemed to stand still. David looked down at Rex, his voice quiet but filled with feeling. "You ready to go home, partner?" Rex tilted his head, then barked once, a low, proud sound that drew laughter from the crowd. Emily giggled, her face lighting up like sunshine. "He said yes!" The sound of that laughter, innocent, pure, carried through the air like a benediction. As they stepped off the stage, the applause rose again, following them down the steps. Rex walked with his head high, metal shining against his fur, each step steady and strong. When they reached the end of the platform, David paused, glancing back one last time at the stage. The wind picked up, rustling the flags, carrying his quiet voice over the fading music. Sometimes the bravest hearts don't wear badges. His voice echoed softly in narration, half thought, half prayer. They beat quietly, beneath fur and behind trust. The scene lingered on that image. Rex walking beside David and Emily through the sunlight, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. The crowd behind them blurred into light and motion, but the three of them remained clear, solid, unbreakable. A family, a team, a promise kept. And as the camera of the world finally pulled back, from the stage, from the flags, from the noise, the last thing left was the shimmer of the metal around Rex's neck, glinting like a heartbeat made of gold. You know, stories like this remind us that loyalty isn't something you can train. It's something freely given. German shepherds, like Rex, have that rare gift of love that runs deeper than words. A kind of faith that stands beside us when the world turns cold. They don't judge, they don't ask for medals. They just stay. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that quiet understanding, you already know what real companionship means. It's not about commands or obedience. It's about trust, patience, and heart. And if you ever feel like learning new ways to strengthen that bond, there's a little resource I came across that's been truly special for me. I'll leave it below. Take a look whenever you feel like it. No pressure. Just something that might make your moments together even more meaningful. Because in the end, the best part of loving a dog isn't what they do for us. It's how they quietly teach us to be better humans.